Imagine trusting your entire net worth, your most guarded business secrets, your public reputation, and honestly, even your physical safety to a single overworked teenager.
Right. Which sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It really does. But if you're a rising middle-class merchant in France in the year 1700, that isn't a nightmare scenario. That's just your Tuesday. I mean, that is simply what happens when you hire a valet.
It's a terrifying level of dependency, really, when you actually look at the mechanics of it. You know, we usually think of survival guides as books that teach you how to start a fire with two sticks.
Yeah, or like how to fend off a bear in the woods.
Exactly. But physical wilderness is only one type of hostile environment. The social and economic ladders of early 18th century France were just as unforgiving.
Oh, absolutely.
One misstep there could completely ruin your family for generations.
Which is exactly why we're opening up a survival guide for the urban jungle today.
Mm.
We are taking a deep dive into a fascinating manual published in 1700 called La Maison Reglée, which translates to The Regulated House.
Written by a man named Oettinger.
Right, Oettinger. And the mission for this deep dive is a little different than our usual historical looks. We aren't, touring the Palace of Versailles. We aren't looking at ultra-rich dukes and duchesses with armies of footmen.
No, we're getting into the real gritty stuff.
Yeah. We are jumping straight into pages 160 to 177 to examine the absolute unsung heroes of the era. So we're talking about the middle-class household servants, the tavern waiters, and the inn staff.
These are the people managing the daily grind. And Oettinger's text is this brilliant window into how a household's reputation or a commercial business's literal financial survival rested squarely on its lowest paid workers.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. It relied entirely on their discretion, their morality, and just their extreme multitasking abilities.
Yeah.
This isn't just a list of chores. It's a blueprint of a highly precarious social ecosystem.
Okay, so let's unpack this ecosystem. I want to start right inside the private walls of a bourgeois home. Because, if you're a grand lord, you have this massive hierarchy of specialized staff.
Oh, yeah, dozens of people.
Right, you have one guy whose entire job is to pour the wine. You have another guy who just holds your coat. But this text specifically notes that the middle-class merchant or the rising professional usually only has one valet.
Yep.
One single guy to do absolutely everything.
The phrase Oettinger uses is that these businessmen n'ont assez souvent qu'un valet. They quite often have only one valet. Because this servant is operating entirely solo, the sheer breadth of his duties is staggering.
I mean, I was exhausted just reading the list.
Right. First, you have the physical management of the master's body. The valet has to know how to shave his master perfectly with a straight razor.
Which requires an immense amount of
Physical trust.
Oh, definitely. One slip, and that's it. And he must know how to comb his hair, how to dress him, and crucially for the year 1700, how to perfectly adjust and maintain his wig.
Okay, wait. I have to pause on the wig. Because my understanding is that these weren't just, cheap Halloween accessories.
Not at all. A wig in 1700 was an incredibly complex, expensive status symbol. They required powdering, they could get infested with lice, which is gross, and they lost their shape if the humidity was wrong.
Yes, the weather was a huge enemy of the wig.
So if your valet messes up your wig, you walk out of your house looking like a complete amateur, which immediately signals to your business partners that your household is in chaos, right?
Yeah, that is the exact anxiety Oettinger is addressing here. The master's entire presentation to the world is manufactured by this one employee. But the physical styling is just the start. The valet is also the ultimate inventory manager.
Oh, right, the clothes.
Yeah, the text says he has to keep the clothes, the hats, the stockings entirely pristine. He actually has to audit the laundry.
Audit the laundry.
He is required to count the individual linens going out to the washerwoman and ensure she returns the exact same number of items she was given.
Which to a modern listener might sound incredibly petty. Like, you're a wealthy merchant. Who cares if you lose one pair of stockings?
Right. Today we just buy a new pack.
Exactly. Yeah. But you have to remember, this is 1700. We are pre-industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Every single thread of cloth had to be spun by hand, woven by hand, and sewn by hand.
It was incredibly labor-intensive.
So clothing was an enormous financial investment. Losing a few good linen shirts back then would be the financial equivalent of someone stealing your brand new laptop today.
Absolutely. It was a massive hit to a family's capital. And the laundry audit highlights another vital requirement, the manual stresses. The valet must know how to read and write.
Which wasn't a given back then.
Not at all. But he has to maintain ledgers. So he isn't just a servant. He's a junior accountant tracking the household's material wealth.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Reading through these pages, the 1700s valet sounds exactly like a modern super app on your smartphone.
Ha! That's a great way to put it.
I mean, he is an executive assistant managing your schedule. He's a personal stylist doing your hair, a forensic accountant tracking your assets, and a bodyguard all rolled into one. And the manual specifically demands absolute loyalty and discretion. Like, he can never say a word about his master's affairs.
Well, he holds the secrets of the business. He knows who the master owes money to. He knows if the master is secretly sick. He knows if the master's marriage is falling apart.
Wow. So if you are that bourgeois master, you are entirely paralyzed without this guy.
Pretty much, yeah.
If your valet decides to quit or just has a really bad day, you basically forget how to function. You can't get dressed. You don't know where your ledgers are, and your business secrets are just walking out the front door.
The vulnerability is palpable. You know, a duke could lose a footman and barely notice. A middle-class merchant could see his entire social status collapse if his single valet was incompetent or malicious.
It's a huge risk.
It is. Their position in society was precariously balanced on the shoulders of one working-class individual.
Okay, so that's the private sphere. Managing the master's body and clothes requires extreme discretion inside the house. But if the valet is guarding the master's reputation behind closed doors, who is protecting it out in the ruthless public market?
Right. The shopping.
Because eventually someone has to go buy the groceries. So this brings us to the maidservants and the treacherous social battlefield of the public market.
Yeah, moving from the private house to the public square introduces entirely new dangers. Ottger provides this vivid, almost theatrical warning about the traps of market gossip.
It's so dramatic.
It really is. He sets up a scenario where a maid goes to the bustling market to buy provisions, and she inevitably runs into another servant from a different household.
It reads exactly like a little stage play.
Yeah.
The other servant ambushes our maid and starts interrogating her. She asks, are you with Madam X? Are they difficult to work for? How do they live?
Right, digging for dirt.
And the warning is that the maid will take the bait and start spilling all the juicy household secrets.
And while the maid is distracted by this gossip, Ottger gives a highly specific breakdown of how the merchants instantly strike.
Yes, the merchants.
Because she isn't paying attention to her actual job, the butcher slips her the absolute worst cuts of meat. The baker hands her poorly made, stale bread. The grocer gives her bad oil, and the fruiterer unloads his old, rotten vegetables on her.
Okay, so I really struggled with the author's logic here when I first read this.
How so?
Well, the manual is blaming the maid for getting scammed, but the butcher is the one deliberately handing over rotten meat. The baker is the one knowingly committing fraud.
It seems like victim blaming.
Totally. It feels to me like the author is way more terrified of working-class women talking to each other than he is of actual rampant merchant fraud.
I get why you'd see it that way. But you have to look at it through the lens of early 18th century economics.
Okay, explain that to me.
You're applying a modern expectation of consumer protection where bad meat is just a scam. In 1700, there are no credit cards, there are no FICO scores or central banks checking your creditworthiness.
Right.
Credit was literal word-of-mouth trust at the local market. If a merchant trusts you, they float you a tab.
Oh, I see. Word of mouth is the actual credit line.
Exactly. Reputation was hard currency. If your maid is gossiping in the square, revealing that your household is chaotic or that you are secretly struggling with money, the merchants hear that.
And they react.
They instantly lose respect for your household. Giving the maid rotten meat isn't just a petty scam. It is a signal that your family no longer commands respect or priority in the market.
Oh, wow.
The bad meat is merely a symptom of a much larger disease, which is the loss of social credit. A ruined reputation could bankrupt a bourgeois family far faster than a few bad cabbages.
That reframes the entire scenario for me. The maid isn't just buying dinner. She is an ambassador negotiating the family's credit rating in real time.
Precisely.
And the manual doubles down on this moral policing of the maids. It sternly warns them against covering for the daughters of the house in their, quote, foolish intrigues.
Ah, yes, foolish intrigues is a very polite 18th century euphemism for secret, unapproved romances.
Teenagers sneaking out to see their boyfriends. But again, the stakes here are so much higher than a modern teenager getting grounded, aren't they?
Immensely higher. In the bourgeois class, marriage was rarely about love. It was a critical financial merger between two families.
Like a corporate acquisition.
That's exactly what it was. It consolidated wealth, secured trade routes, and elevated social standing. If a teenage daughter gets involved in a scandal or a secret romance with someone of a lower station, that financial asset is destroyed.
Wow.
The family's economic future goes up in smoke.
And the manual warns the maid that playing accomplice to these secret romances won't just ruin the family, it will ruin the maid's own honor.
She has to be above reproach.
She is expected to be a moral fortress. I mean,
Yeah.
she has to guard the family from rotten vegetables, she has to protect their market credit score, and she has to physically prevent the teenage daughters from destroying the family's financial mergers. The psychological load these workers were carrying is just wild.
They were the load-bearing pillars of the middle-class facade.
So, we've seen how the maid experiences the commercial world as a highly vulnerable buyer. If she is the buyer, let's look at the sellers.
Let's do it.
I want to pivot to the servants who operate the bustling hospitality industry of 1700. Let's talk about the tavern waiters, or as the text calls them, the Garçons de Cabaret.
Odegaard dedicates a fantastic section to the first waiter, and it becomes immediately clear that this role is not an ordinary server carrying plates of food.
Right.
The first waiter is essentially the operational manager, the head of security, and the chief inventory officer of the establishment.
The text outlines that he has to intimately know the cellar. He has to memorize the exact qualities and the varying prices of all the different wines.
It's a lot of inventory to track in your head.
It is. And he has to actively instruct a junior waiter so they don't accidentally go down there and sell a premium vintage cask for the price of a cheap, watered-down table wine.
And the preparation and cleanliness required before a customer even takes a single sip is a massive undertaking. The first waiter must clarify the wines.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
He must know exactly when to tap the barrels that are ready to drink. He has to keep the wooden casks themselves immaculate, ensure the drinking water is perfectly clean, and make sure every single glass is rinsed.
I want to make sure we understand what clarifying wine actually meant back then. Today, we buy wine in a bottle and it's perfectly clear,
Usually, yes.
But in 1700, wine in a cask was often cloudy, filled with sediment, dead yeast, and grape solids.
It wasn't pretty.
To clarify it, this waiter would have to mix in egg whites, or a substance called isinglass, which binds to the floating particles and drags them to the bottom of the barrel as sludge. It was a delicate chemical process.
Very delicate.
If he messes it up, he serves a glass of gritty, cloudy sludge to a paying customer.
It is a highly technical skill. He is managing a living, volatile product in a dark, damp cellar. And while he is managing the chemistry downstairs, he has to manage the accounting and security upstairs.
This is the part that blew my mind. He has to clear tables quickly, but the manual specifically notes he must remember to retrieve the silver napkins. The silver spoons, forks, and knives. Sorry, silver napkins would make sense.
No, silver napkins would be quite uncomfortable.
Right, but using real silver in a public tavern full of drunk people in 1700 seems incredibly risky. Why not just use cheap wooden spoons?
Because of the very upward mobility we've been discussing, the rising middle class, these merchants and professionals, wanted to experience the luxury of the nobility.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. A tavern that wanted to attract wealthy clientele had to offer the trappings of wealth, which meant real silver. But silver was a massively liquid asset. It was a highly concentrated form of wealth that could be easily melted down or pawned.
So this first waiter is a bouncer, a sommelier, an auditor, and a security guard trying to stop patrons from pocketing the silverware.
He bridges the critical gap between raw, vulnerable inventory, the wine aging in the cellar, the capital investment of the silver, and the customer experience.
That's a ton of pressure.
His ability to track that inventory and corral a team of junior staff is literally the only thing standing between a profitable tavern and total financial ruin. Mispricing one premium cask or letting one table walk out with the silver forks could completely wipe out the master's profit margin for the entire month.
It is high-stakes hospitality. But, a tavern is just a temporary stop for a few hours.
True.
The manual then moves on to inns, which require housing people, their luggage, and their animals overnight. And reading this section, the logistical chaos and the risk of theft exponentially multiply.
Oh, without a doubt. An inn in 1700 was essentially a fortified ecosystem. The roads were terrible, often muddy, unpaved, and highly dangerous.
Not a fun road trip.
Not at all. When travelers arrived at an inn, it was their sanctuary. Let's look at how the manual divides the labor here, starting with the maids of the inn.
Okay.
They are tasked with tracking exactly what guests consume so the final bill is accurate. But crucially, they serve as the early warning security system for hustlers.
Yes. The manual details the 18th century dine and dash.
It does.
It explicitly states that if the maid suspects a guest is trying to leave at dawn without paying their bill, she must immediately alert the master. They then step in and physically hold the guest's luggage hostage until the account is settled.
It was a very common threat. Transients could easily disappear onto the roads. The manual also instructs these maids to aggressively ignore flirtations from guests.
Which makes sense.
And quite specifically, Oettinger warns them not to get drunk in the cellar.
Which, if you are writing an official published manual, implies that maids getting drunk in the cellar with the guests was a frequent enough problem that it demanded a written rule.
Human nature is remarkably consistent, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
But while the maids are managing the humans inside the inn, the valets, the stable hands, are managing the vital transportation outside in the courtyard.
Their workflow is ruthless. Carriages arrive, and they have to greet the guests, carry the luggage safely without stealing anything, physically take the muddy boots off the guests' feet.
A terrible job.
Yeah. And then, this is the detail I found most fascinating. They must immediately inspect the horse's hooves and harnesses.
Why do you think the immediate inspection was so critical?
Well, think about the logistics of the era. If a horse has thrown a shoe, or a leather harness is torn, you cannot just quickly swap it out like a spare tire on a car.
Right.
You have to find a blacksmith, fire up a forge, and custom fit a piece of iron. The manual insists on an immediate inspection so that these laborious repairs can happen overnight.
Exactly.
If the stable hand waits until morning to notice a broken shoe, the guest's departure is delayed by an entire day. It is pure operational efficiency.
But then, right in the middle of all this ruthless capitalist efficiency, we get this incredibly poignant detail.
Yes, the horses.
The manual gives a very stern moral directive regarding feeding the animals. It warns the valets and even corrupt innkeepers themselves that they must never, ever steal the hay and oats meant for the guests' horses.
And Oettinger explicitly writes that you cannot steal the oats because the poor beasts cannot speak to complain.
It's surprisingly tender.
It is incredibly striking to read. The manual shows almost more empathy and moral concern for the horses than it does for the overworked human staff.
It is a profound moment of empathy in an otherwise rigid text. But if we synthesize this observation with the reality of 18th century travel, we understand the underlying mechanics of why this rule was so sacred.
Right, it wasn't just about being nice to animals.
No, a traveler's horse wasn't just a vehicle. It was a living creature that required highly specialized, dense calories to maintain its strength. If a corrupt innkeeper skims the oats to save money, the horse weakens.
And if the horse weakens, it might collapse on the road 20 miles from anywhere.
Precisely. Stealing a horse's food was not just petty theft from the owner's wallet. It was actively endangering the traveler's ability to survive the journey.
Because you're just stranded.
Stranded. If you are stuck on a freezing, muddy road in 1700 because your horse collapsed from malnutrition, you are vulnerable to bandits, to the elements, to starvation.
Wow. So economic honesty was tied directly and vitally to animal welfare.
Absolutely.
If you couldn't trust an inn to honestly feed your horse, you quite literally trusted them with your life, and you would make sure everyone in your network knew never to stay at that inn again.
That is the ultimate test of the hospitality industry of the time. The entire system relied on the stable hand doing the right thing in the dark when no one was watching.
So if you are listening to this right now, let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. We opened this 1700 survival guide expecting a dry list of chores. But what we actually uncovered is this incredibly intricate, fragile web of trust.
It's all connected.
From the solitary valet holding his bourgeois master's deepest financial and personal secrets, to the maid guarding the family's credit rating at the market.
To the tavern waiter protecting the silver spoons.
Exactly. And the stable hand entrusted with a horse's life and a traveler's safety. This entire economy, this grand facade of middle-class wealth and hospitality, ran entirely on the competence and the morality of the working class.
It is a powerful realization. You know, the next time you stay at a hotel or grab a coffee at a busy cafe or drop your clothes off at the dry cleaner, take a moment to look past the transaction.
Right. Look at the people.
Think about the invisible labor and the quiet logistics making your life seamless. The technology has evolved dramatically. We use software instead of ledgers and cars instead of horses, but the fundamental reliance on human diligence.
On someone just doing their job honestly when no one is looking.
Exactly. That hasn't changed a bit.
I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to explore on your own today. This book, La Maison Reglée, was written and published as an instruction manual for employers.
Right. A management guide.
It was a tool to help the wealthy control their households and maximize their businesses. But if you read between the lines, it is actually a brilliant, unintentional historical record of exactly how much hidden power the employees truly held.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Think about the timeline. This was published in 1700. Just 89 years later, the French Revolution would completely tear this society apart.
Oh, right, 1789.
The masters thought they were the main characters of history, directing the show from their drawing rooms. But when you realize that the servants held the keys to the cellars, knew exactly where the silver was kept, intimately understood the financial vulnerabilities of the masters, and communicated with every other household in the public market, it changes your perspective.
It flips the whole power dynamic.
Exactly. If you wanted to completely sabotage a wealthy family or upend a society, you didn't need a foreign army. You just needed a chatty maid at the vegetable market and a valet who suddenly decided he didn't want to count the laundry anymore.
The quiet power of the working class.
The real infrastructure holding the 18th century together wasn't made of stone or royal decrees. It was made of the quiet, invisible decisions of the people sweeping the floors. And the moment they decided to stop, well, everything fell apart.